Let's talk about everybody's favorite subject, conference realignment. When will the next cycle begin, and what will be the factors that force teams to move conferences? This is College Football Media, and you're a good sport, so thanks for clicking on this video. On this channel, we talk about teams, trends, and traditions to logos, history, and predictions. If that sounds cool to you, consider subscribing for some in-depth college football content. Now let's get to business. You probably remember the last time conference realignment was a big deal, circa 2011 or 2012, when these teams decided to change conferences and the entire landscape changed in college football. But what was it that forced these teams, in their eyes, to jump ship to a better, more successful, or stronger conference? And when is the next time that this will likely happen again? Before the factors become important to why teams will want to go to a specific conference, there's a trigger that fires off the whole chain reaction. And that trigger is TV contracts. TV contracts are super important when it comes to conferences, and mainly in how much money that they make. If you're a president or athletic director of a school, the more money you make, the better. So how do you make more money? As a conference, when your TV contract deal ends and comes to a close, you get to renegotiate and sign a new contract with a specific TV provider, whichever one you want, whether it be ESPN and ABC, Fox, CBS, NBC, it doesn't matter. And you get to sell yourself as a conference to try to make as much money as possible. In order to make as much money as possible, you want to have as many assets as you can. In this case, the asset is a college football team. Before your contract ends, you want to up your assets. That way you have those assets before you begin negotiations in making a new contract and signing it. The more good college football teams in your conference, the more assets you have. The more assets you have, the more money you make from the TV deal. So when will this next cycle begin? 2023 to around 2025. In reality, that's only a couple years away. So specifically, the first conference whose deal ends is the Big Ten. That ends at the conclusion of the 2022 to 23 season. After that, both the Pac 12 and SEC ends after 2023 to 2024. The Big 12 wraps it up with their deal expiring in 2024 to 2025. The ACC's deal expires well after that, just about a decade, in 2035 and 36 season. But that doesn't mean that they're out of the loop for this realignment cycle in the mid-2020 decade. So what will these conferences be looking for when this time comes? It's simple, really. Number one, money. It's that easy. We've already mentioned it a little bit, but of course, from a commissioner, from a school, from an entire conference, to the TV provider, to the college football playoff, anybody, they all want more money. That's number one. The number two factor is geography and maps. In the last cycle, conferences wanted to expand their geographic map to therefore be in more TV markets and regions to make, therefore, more money. That's somewhat the reason why West Virginia is in the Big 12, which, of course, makes no sense. As a conference, you want to be able to expand and cover as much ground as possible within reason to make sense with travel and those sort of things, which can be a tricky thing to find out exactly where that line is. The third factor is brands, and by brands I mean the specific teams and schools that are most valuable in college football and college basketball. One thing that a casual college football fan might not think about is one entity, let's say, that could throw a wrench in the entire system, and that is streaming services. Because written and scripted shows and television has gone to streaming. It's gone to Netflix, it's gone to Hulu, it's gone to Disney Plus, things of that nature. And TV has been left in the dust. The best thing, really the only thing that they're left with that they have, which is valuable, is sports. This next cycle will be crucial for TV in general and cable networks. Streaming services, on the other hand, what if they get into the game? It's tech companies that have this entire plethora amount of money to be able to throw at these conferences if they wish to. It's tech companies like Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, and even Google that could get into this and might want a piece of the pie. And that means they have more money to spend and give these conferences to say, let us broadcast your live sports and we'll pay you this amount of money. And that's all it takes for the conferences to agree if it's a substantial amount more than TV cable can ever offer. Now, nobody knows if these tech companies will get into live sports, but for how much money live sports makes, of course, it wouldn't be surprising if these tech companies did want to get a piece of that pie, as I mentioned. Again, that's why cable TV needs to keep live sports, and they will offer as much money as they can. And of course, conferences, the more offers they have, the more choices they have, the more money they make. I am no expert on this and I don't know what will happen, but it's something that is very, very intriguing, especially to watch within the next couple of years. I don't have any answers for exactly how this could alter the college football landscape in terms of tech companies getting involved in broadcasting sports as opposed to cable TV, or which will win out. Of course, like I said, I'm no expert on that, but it's an interesting topic that could, as I said, basically unearth anything that we really don't even know what could happen. But with that being said, let's still explore some possibilities for what the landscape could look like at this time in the mid-2020 decade. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to give my predictions for what I think will happen when that time comes. Now get me clear, I am not proposing any ideas of what I think should happen. It's not what I want to happen at all. There's plenty of people that can make fantasy conferences in a fantasy system that will create something that works perfectly, and no such thing exists in college football. I can talk about that later if I want to, but for the time being, in this video, I'm going to talk about what I think actually will happen, and therefore it will make no sense. And I say that because, as you know, conferences, they don't care about what makes sense when it comes to traditions and rivalries. Like I said, those factors, all they care about is money, and that's what made Nebraska go to the Big Ten, for example. So I'm expressing what I think is most likely to happen with all of these conferences, and let's begin with the Big Ten, because their contract ends first after the 2022-23 season of sports. The Big Ten currently has 14 teams, which, like I said, makes perfect sense. And I would guess that most of these conferences, in order to maximize their assets, will try to get to that coveted 16 number for 16-team power conferences. Getting into the mind of the commissioner of the Big Ten can be difficult, but one thing that is crucial, which not everybody always thinks about, is that the Big Ten cares a lot about academics and being a member of the AAU. The AAU stands for the Association of American Universities, and it's a very prestigious thing to be a part of. The Big Ten wants to have as many AAU members as possible, which are also good at football and basketball. So when you think Big Ten country, where does that leave you? You can raid the Big 12, and I would expect the Big Ten to add Kansas and Iowa State. Both schools are members of the AAU. Kansas brings an incredible basketball tradition, which the Big Ten likes. They like college basketball. That means a lot more money for the Big Ten, better TV deal, as I said. And Iowa State, it fits culturally in the Big Ten. And this even helps the divisions when it comes to the Big Ten in football, because currently the state of Indiana is split, with Indiana being in the East Division and Purdue being in the West Division. Adding two more teams in the West Division means that Purdue can go to the East. And before I shift to the next conference, let me say that I think the Big Ten, the ACC, and the SEC will not have anybody taken from their conferences. I think if you're a team in any of those three, that you will want to stay in that conference because it is financially sound. The Big Ten and SEC make the most money of any conferences, period, and therefore nobody would want to leave that financial situation, even if it's a weird cultural fit. And the ACC, which just launched their own conference network with ESPN, I believe will catch up very quickly, and they'll be a part of that group, and nobody will really want to leave the ACC either. Let's go to the Southeastern Conference now and see who they would want to add to better their TV deal after the Big Ten expands to 16. And as soon as one conference expands to 16, the chain reaction will begin. So the SEC will look to what I would think would also be the Big 12. SEC is definitely a football conference, so you would expect them to add football schools. And out of the Big 12, who are the two biggest football schools? Oklahoma and Texas. That's the easy answer. However, you have to remember that Texas might get a little, let's just say, stingy when it comes to joining the SEC. Let me explain briefly. Texas has their own TV contract with ESPN in the Longhorn Network, and Texas hates Texas A&M. It's that easy. They both hate each other. They won't even play each other in the regular season anymore, which I think is a travesty. However, I doubt that they would want to be in the same conference as their rivals, Texas A&M, because A&M thinks they got the better end of the deal right now. A&M thinks they're better than Texas. Texas thinks they're better than everybody. So basically, I think Texas, their pride will get in the way and they won't want to join the SEC, even if it does mean a good paycheck, because they want to keep their money from the Longhorn Network and they don't want to feel on the same level as A&M. I don't think Oklahoma has any problems joining the SEC. It fits culturally, it fits with football, it fits geographically. It makes sense. So who else in the Big 12 is a good football fit? Answer, Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State also fits very well culturally. They care a lot about football. It's not just the Sooners, it's everybody within the entire state of Oklahoma that loves football. So Oklahoma and Oklahoma State makes sense, and again, it helps the divisions out, because in this case, Missouri can go to the West Division, and both Alabama and Auburn would be moved to the East. Now, what does this mean for the Big 12? Obviously, not good news at all. You're left with 6 teams: Texas, Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor, Kansas State, and West Virginia. And West Virginia did not make any sense geographically to begin with. This means they would either have to, as the Big 12, add teams from, say, the American Athletic Conference. However, I don't think that would be strong enough to continue as a powerful conference at all. I think Texas would probably want to jump ship, and therefore everybody would implode within the Big 12. So what happens? Well, the Pac-12 has 12 teams currently, which somehow makes sense, but they are the least powerful of the Power 5 conferences. With the Big 12 taking a huge shot in the arm and basically disbanding, the Pac-12 would need to get somebody else to help strengthen themselves on the West Coast. So as the Pac-12, you kind of have to take what's left, but you get a jewel, a gem, in the University of Texas coming to the Pac-12. That means you have Texas, USC, Oregon, Washington, all in the same conference, and that would be a lot of fun. But who else comes with Texas? In order for Texas to come, you need geographical help. So that way travel can be at least a little bit easier going to the West Coast so frequently. So in order to be successful as a conference and get Texas to the Pac-12, that means you basically take 3 more Texas schools. So to go from 12 to 16, you add Texas, Texas Tech, Baylor, and TCU. Fairly simple. All of the Texas schools currently in the Big 12, they just go to the Pac-12 to make the Pac 16, which I think could be a fairly good, powerful conference. But that leaves West Virginia and Kansas State pretty much in limbo, and we'll come back to them in a second. You're down to Power 4 conferences, and the ACC will have to add somebody to keep up, clearly. And the ACC, if you are paying attention, already has some contractual obligations from the University of Notre Dame. Notre Dame is already a member of the ACC in every sport but football. I'm not kidding, and yes, I am as frustrated at that as you are. Notre Dame up to this point has been able to keep their independent status. However, with the current scape of where I think college football will go, I don't know how much longer that can last. They've been able to make a BCS championship. They've been able to make a college football playoff. However, I think by this point, with 16-team power conferences, I think you kind of have to join. Which to every fan who's not a fan of Notre Dame will finally get their wish to have Notre Dame join a conference. Of course, it's not the Big Ten, which would make sense. It's the ACC, which again, makes no sense whatsoever. But contracts say if Notre Dame in football joins a conference, it has to be the ACC. Therefore, if you're the ACC, who else do you add? You need one more to get to 16 when it comes to football and, well, in general. So who do you add? You could look at West Virginia. They fit geographically in the area and probably some rivalries with Virginia and Virginia Tech. However, I think that the ACC would pass up on West Virginia simply because of academics. The ACC is another conference that really likes to have strong academic schools, which Notre Dame is. However, West Virginia, that kept them out of, well, the ACC or perhaps the Big Ten in the past. For the Atlantic Coast Conference, you have to look to other teams in the group of 5 to see who you could add. And out of those G5 conferences, the best is clearly the American Athletic Conference. You could look at UCF, you could look at USF, you could look at East Carolina within North Carolina, but I doubt you would want another school in that state. You could look at Temple, which is in Pennsylvania. But I think if you're the ACC, what makes most sense is to add the University of Cincinnati. The University of Cincinnati would add geographical state, plus Indiana with Notre Dame. So you get Indiana and the state of Ohio both a part of the Atlantic Coast Conference, which helps recruiting a ton. And a huge plus side, Cincinnati is very close geographically to Louisville and also relatively close to Notre Dame. Wouldn't it be a lot of fun to see Cincinnati be a Power 5 school, a Power 4 school within the same state as Ohio State, who's been able to dominate that state, which is very rich when it comes to recruiting. In this scenario that I played out, the only teams that are currently in a Power Conference that got dropped and not in a Power 4 conference would be Kansas State and West Virginia. Both of them were in the Big 12, and because of their disbandment, then they kind of get left in limbo to hang, and they would have to join one of the G5 schools. I would expect them both, West Virginia and Kansas State, to join the American Athletic Conference. I know the ACC would love to get the chance to get Kansas State and West Virginia a part of their conference to strengthen it as a G5 conference program. And with Cincinnati leaving the American, it would make sense to add schools like West Virginia and Kansas State. Of course, like I said, conference realignment makes no sense when it comes to what will actually happen. That's my guess from, 5 years out? We'll see how it turns up. I'm sure I will be wrong, but to me, I could see some thought processes going as such to turn out in that way when it comes to the teams and conferences. Question of the day. If you could choose one team to move to one other conference, who would it be, where, and why? Let me know in the comment section down below. And let me know what you thought of my predictions, if they're realistic or not. What do you think? Leave it all in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and consider subscribing for in-depth college football content. You can check out some more videos right over here. That's all for College Football Media. Until next time, be goody now.